The desert has always held its secrets well. But in Nevada, where endless miles of dust and rock stretch beyond the horizon, some secrets feel alive. They hum beneath the ground, whispering through the wind that sweeps across abandoned airstrips and rusted warning signs. Most people have heard of Area 51. It's practically legend, a place tied to every alien story, every government cover-up, every unexplainable light that ever danced across the night sky. But almost no one talks about what lies 40 miles east, a place that doesn't appear on any satellite database, no flight paths cross it, and no civilian has ever been allowed near it. The locals who live closest to it call it Area 55. Officially, it doesn't exist, but the ground there trembles at night, and strange glows rise over the hills like silent flares. For decades, it's been dismissed as paranoia. That changed when a former defense contractor came forward with footage the world wasn't supposed to see. The story begins on a cold night in early 2014. A set of corrupted files appeared on an encrypted government archive, files labeled simply Restricted Zone Surveillance, 55A. Inside were hundreds of video fragments, all time-stamped between 2:10 a.m. and 3:03 a.m. The footage came from an unknown camera system, black and white, static-filled, shaky. But something about it felt wrong. The angles weren't from a drone or guard tower. They seemed to come from the ground itself, as if the cameras had been buried in the soil and forgotten. The first clip showed what looked like a barren desert plain, motionless under the stars. Then, faintly, a pulse of light appeared near the horizon, like lightning but soundless. A few seconds later, a shadow moved across the frame. Not a human, not an animal. Too tall, too fluid. Then the feed glitched and cut to black. When the files were reviewed by analysts inside the Department of Defense, most dismissed them as test footage from a malfunctioning sensor array. But one technician, a satellite analyst named Ryan Morrow, noticed something others didn't. The coordinates in the metadata placed the camera beyond the known boundaries of Area 51, in a region that wasn't supposed to be under surveillance at all. That area, labeled internally as Zone 55, had been inactive for nearly 30 years. No records, no patrols, nothing. Morrow dug deeper. He discovered an old incident report from 1989, heavily redacted, referencing an unauthorized excavation and subterranean contamination event. The name of the supervising officer was blacked out. The description was short and vague, but mentioned an object of unknown composition, unearthed during a military tunneling experiment. The last line of the document was the most chilling: containment successful. Zone sealed indefinitely. Nobody knew what the object was or why it needed containment. But the 2014 footage suggested something had reactivated that site. Morrow's curiosity got the better of him. He copied the files onto an encrypted drive and sent them to a private research network known for investigating government anomalies. That act alone cost him his clearance, and possibly much more. He vanished from public record 2 weeks later. His apartment was found empty, computer wiped, no sign of forced entry. But the files didn't disappear with him. They surfaced on a private message board used by former intelligence officers, where they caught the attention of Dr. Evan Cross, a physicist and data specialist who had once worked on atmospheric experiments in the same region. When he opened the files, the name Area 55 triggered something in his memory. He remembered a base rumor, something whispered among contractors at Groom Lake. They called it the Mirror Site. Unlike Area 51, which focused on aerial testing, Area 55 was said to deal with deep terrain research, experiments meant to study magnetic anomalies and underground signals that appeared to originate from beneath the Nevada desert itself. Some believed they were tracking natural frequencies, others thought they were monitoring something that wasn't natural at all. Dr. Cross began piecing together the footage frame by frame. In one video, he noticed faint reflections in the sand, like glass but not shattered. Another clip captured what appeared to be a metallic shape emerging from a fissure before the feed abruptly cut off. When he enhanced the image, he realized it wasn't metal. It was a surface reflecting light from within itself, like a mirror that glowed. What terrified him most wasn't what was shown in the footage, but what was missing. The final clip ended with a line of static, and a series of timestamps that didn't make sense. According to the data, the footage had been recorded 5 minutes into the future. He couldn't explain it. No editing software could fake that without altering the time signature. The only logical answer was that the recording devices themselves were experiencing time distortion, a concept that defied everything he knew about physics. That was when he reached out to a small circle of trusted experts, each with ties to former military intelligence. Together, they decided they would investigate the region firsthand. But even before they began their expedition, strange things started to happen. Dr. Cross's phone received scrambled calls from unknown numbers. His emails would delete themselves seconds after being opened. One night, he returned home to find a black SUV parked across the street. No plates. Engine running. When he approached, it drove off without headlights. That was the night he decided to document everything on physical tape, not digital. He started a video log, recording his plans, his suspicions, and his fears. "If anything happens to me," he said in one of his entries, "the truth is out there in the footage. They can erase it all." The following week, his team packed their gear: thermal cameras, drones, radiation detectors, and enough supplies for a 2-day operation in the desert. They used the old name, Operation Zone Watch, a classified term long retired from official use. Their objective wasn't to trespass, it was to observe. To see what those cameras from 2014 had seen, and maybe understand why someone wanted the footage erased. They left Las Vegas at dawn, heading north along Highway 375, the extraterrestrial highway. Locals at gas stations warned them not to camp near the Black Mountains or the old mining road that led to the dry basin. "People go missing out there," one man said quietly, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes you hear engines when there's nothing around. Sometimes you hear voices underground." By nightfall, they reached the edge of the restricted perimeter, a stretch of land marked by faded warning signs and weathered steel fencing. Beyond that fence lay the heart of the mystery. The air felt wrong, thick, charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning storm. They set up their first camera station and waited for darkness to fall. What happened over the next 48 hours would become the foundation for one of the most controversial pieces of classified footage ever recovered. Footage that was never meant to exist. Footage that someone somewhere is still trying to bury. Because the truth isn't set just inside Area 51. It's what lies next to it, in the shadows of Area 55, where the cameras caught something no one was supposed to see. The sun was falling behind the Nevada mountains when Dr. Evan Cross and his team pulled their dusty SUV onto a dirt path that didn't appear on any map. They had followed a trail of coordinates traced from the leaked satellite metadata, and by nightfall, they were deep in the restricted buffer zone surrounding Area 55. To an outsider, they looked like nothing more than a small group of geologists, 5 people, 1 van, and a pile of equipment. But inside that equipment were modified sensors, magnetic frequency readers, and encrypted drives. Every one of them had signed non-disclosure agreements with previous government agencies, and all of them knew this operation was crossing a dangerous line. Dr. Cross was the leader, calm, methodical, and brilliant. In his mid-40s, with streaks of grey cutting through his beard, he carried himself like a man who had seen too much and still wanted to know more. Once he had worked for a defense research division, focusing on experimental energy systems. But after a classified experiment went wrong in 2008, one that left an entire test site sealed under emergency lockdown, Cross quietly resigned and disappeared from the official record. Next to him was Jake Miller, a drone technician and video specialist who had spent years filming military test flights in the Nevada desert. He was the youngest on the team, confident but easily shaken. His fascination with forbidden places and hidden technology bordered on obsession. He believed Area 55 was a mirror base, built to house technology that didn't come from Earth. Then there was Dr. Lena Ward, a linguist and cryptanalyst who once worked with the NSA. Her specialty was data reconstruction, taking broken code and piecing it back together. She wasn't a believer in aliens or conspiracies. She was a scientist chasing patterns. For her, the mystery was mathematical. How could data exist 5 minutes in the future? What kind of signal could rewrite time itself? Marcus Delaney, their security lead, was a former Air Force pilot who'd been stationed at Groom Lake before being discharged for asking the wrong questions about an incident he'd witnessed on radar. He didn't talk much. He drove, kept watch, and carried a small sidearm even though the mission wasn't supposed to be dangerous. He had seen strange things in the desert, things the official reports called radar interference. Lastly, there was Sarah Imani, a geologist and electromagnetic engineer who had studied seismic patterns in Nevada for a decade. She had noticed recurring underground tremors that didn't match fault line movement. The tremors seemed artificial, rhythmic, timed as though something beneath the surface was alive. They called themselves Project Meridian, the name chosen by Dr. Cross, symbolizing the point where science and the unknown meet. Their objective was simple on paper: verify the authenticity of the leaked Area 55 surveillance footage, and collect new environmental data from the coordinates attached to it. But beneath that professional goal was something deeper. Each of them was searching for an answer to a question that had haunted them for years. As they drove deeper into the no-man's land beyond Tonopah, the silence became heavier. The desert was too still. No wind, no insects, just the sound of the van's tires crunching against gravel. The road eventually vanished into open dust, and Cross guided them toward a flat stretch marked only by a crumbling fence and a single rusted sign. Restricted area, use of deadly force authorized. Jake looked out the window and whispered, "It sets real, this is it." Dr. Cross raised his camera and recorded the moment. "Log entry 1, he said quietly. Team Meridian 2100 hours. Entering buffer zone coordinates 40.6 by 115.2. All readings nominal. Communications secure. Moving forward." The first thing they noticed as they stepped out was the smell. It wasn't sand or oil, it was metallic, like old batteries. The second was the sound, or rather the lack of it. Even in the desert, there should have been wind, but here the air seemed trapped, vibrating faintly like static. Sarah checked her instruments. "Electromagnetic interference," she said. "We're in a field of it." They set up their first observation post half a mile from the fence. Marcus rigged the perimeter with motion sensors, while Jake prepared 2 drones for launch. The plan was to send the drones toward the coordinates where the original 2014 footage was recorded. The area was believed to contain an old sealed access hatch, possibly part of a decommissioned test site. Dr. Ward synced the data receiver to their private satellite uplink. "If anyone's watching us, they'll know soon," she said. Dr. Cross smiled faintly. "Then we had better make it worth their time." The drones lifted off, their lights flickering red in the dusk. Through Jake's monitor, they watched the terrain glide beneath. Ridges of black stone, dry gullies, patches of salt that glowed faintly under infrared. Then something odd appeared. A series of perfect circular patterns burned into the sand, each one about 12 feet wide. They weren't visible to the naked eye, only infrared picked them up. "Thermal signatures?" Marcus asked. Jake shook his head. "No heat source. But they set cold, colder than the surrounding ground. Like something was here and drained the temperature." Sarah leaned closer to the screen. "Or something underneath is pulling it down." They marked the location. The patterns formed a path leading toward a rocky hill about 2 miles ahead. From the air, the hill looked unnatural, smooth, symmetrical, as if carved by machines. Dr. Cross stared at the screen for a long time. "That's where we're going," he said finally. They waited until midnight before moving closer. The team advanced on foot, following the drone's beacon lights. The night sky was clear, millions of stars overhead, but near the hill, the air shimmered, warping the stars like heat waves, except the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Marcus Setzer's radio crackled suddenly with faint static. "Signal jammed," he muttered. "Someone sets blocking us." Dr. Ward frowned. "We sit not near any broadcast towers. It sits coming from underground." They reached the base of the hill just after 1 a.m. That's when Jake's drone feed began to glitch. On the monitor, they saw the image stutter. The ground seemed to ripple, as though space itself was bending. The drone's sensors spiked. For one frame, something metallic flashed under the surface. Then the feed went black. "Drone down," Jake whispered. "Its set's gone." Dr. Cross recorded everything, narrating into his camera. Visual interference detected. Possible electromagnetic distortion. Temperature holding at -4°C. Unnatural reading. Proceeding to ground scan. They deployed portable scanners. The devices emitted low hums as they penetrated the ground with sonar. Moments later, the results came through. Beneath the hill was an empty cavity, about 60 feet deep, shaped like a chamber. The readings indicated reinforced alloy walls. Sarah Sipp's voice trembled slightly as she read the data. "That Sipp's not geological. Someone built that." They were standing on top of something buried, something enormous, and possibly still operational. Dr. Cross turned off his camera and looked at the team. "Tomorrow night," he said, "we go inside." But none of them knew that they weren't the first to find it. The cameras from 2014 had already seen what waited below, and what they captured was the reason that entire stretch of land was erased from every official record. Because Area 55 wasn't set just another secret base. It was a door, and something on the other side was waiting for it to be opened again. The desert was silent again when Team Meridian returned to the site the next night. The air felt heavier, thicker, almost like it was pressing down on their lungs. Even the moon seemed duller, its light swallowed by the horizon. They moved carefully, headlights off, using only infrared goggles to navigate the sand-blown trail back to the strange hill. Dr. Evan Cross led the way, holding a portable scanner that pulsed with soft blue light. Every few steps, he checked the readings, nodding to himself, his expression grim but controlled. Behind him, Jake carried the new drone packed with a high-frequency camera and night vision lens. Dr. Lena Ward followed with her data console strapped to her vest, eyes glued to the flickering monitor. Marcus Delaney brought up the rear, rifle slung across his shoulder, sweeping the terrain with silent precision. Sarah Imani walked beside him, adjusting her seismic receiver every few minutes, as if listening for something no one else could hear. "Still no signals?" Marcus whispered. "Nothing. Total blackout." "Whatever's down there, it eats radio waves," Lena said quietly. They reached the foot of the hill just before midnight. The spot where Jake's drone had gone down the night before was marked by a small crater of scorched sand. The edges shimmered faintly in the infrared scope, colder than the rest of the ground. Sarah crouched to examine it, brushing her gloved fingers across the dirt. It felt smooth, polished, like glass. "This wasn't set an explosion," she murmured. "It sets crystallization." The silica in the sand fused instantly. Jake frowned. "That happens only at what thousands of degrees?" Sarah nodded. "Or a sudden electromagnetic discharge." Dr. Cross looked toward the top of the hill. "Set the transmitter here," he said. Will record everything, no matter what happens." The team worked quickly, setting up 3 high-frequency microphones, 2 static cameras, and a motion capture sensor array surrounding the hill's base. Every cable, every battery, every blinking LED was part of their insurance, proof that whatever they saw tonight was real. Once the equipment was in place, Cross pointed to a spot about 30 feet away from the center. "That set's where the anomaly begins," he said. "Temperature drop, EM distortion. It all converges right there. We dig." They unpacked a small excavation rig and began drilling into the ground. The desert surface cracked easily at first, but after just a foot, the drill hit metal, a deep, echoing clang that sent vibrations up through their boots. Everyone froze. "Metal plate," Marcus said, tapping the ground with the butt of his flashlight. "Artificial, big." Jake switched on his camera. "You steer telling me we steered standing on a door?" Cross knelt, brushing sand away until a dull grey surface emerged, smooth, featureless, with only faint seams crossing it like veins. In the center was a small circular indentation, about the size of a handprint. Sarah tilted her head. "Looks like a sensor." Before anyone could stop him, Dr. Cross placed his gloved palm against it. The moment his skin touched the metal, the ground beneath them vibrated. A low hum rolled through the air, deep enough to rattle their bones. The sand around the plate shifted and collapsed inward. Lena stumbled back, shouting over the sound, "Evan, step away." But he didn't. His eyes were fixed on the indentation, now glowing faintly blue beneath his hand. Then, with a sharp hiss, the entire section of ground began to move. The plate rotated slowly, revealing a circular hatch descending into darkness. A gust of cold air escaped, carrying with it a smell none of them could describe. Something metallic, sterile, and faintly sweet, like ozone mixed with decay. Marcus aimed his flashlight into the opening. The beam illuminated a narrow shaft descending straight down about 50 feet. Steel walls lined with faint blue lights spiraled below. Lena swallowed hard. "We shouldn't be doing this." Dr. Cross adjusted his glasses, voice calm. "You don't come this far to turn back." He clipped a rope to the anchor and began descending. One by one, the others followed. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became, until even their breathing seemed too loud. When they reached the bottom, they stepped into a tunnel that stretched out in both directions, its walls smooth and metallic. Strange symbols, half geometric, half organic, were etched into the surface, glowing faintly as they passed. The temperature dropped to near freezing, and the air carried a faint hum, like distant machinery still running somewhere below. Jake panned his camera along the wall. "This is impossible. This is an SS Air Force construction. These materials aren't assessed even in the database." Sarah ran a scanner along the surface. "The alloy sept's unknown. Some kind of self-healing composite. It sits repairing scratches as we speak." Marcus shivered. Then who built it? That question hung in the air as they moved forward. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast circular chamber, so large their lights couldn't reach the ceiling. In the center stood a column of translucent material. Maybe glass, maybe something else. Inside it floated a dark shape, suspended motionless. They approached slowly. As they got closer, the temperature fell again. Their breath fogged in the air. Lena's monitor began displaying static. Jake's camera flickered. The shape inside the column came into focus. It was humanoid, roughly the size of a man, but the proportions were wrong. Its arms were too long, its torso too narrow, and its head was elongated, with no visible mouth or eyes. Sarah took a step back. "It sets alive." The figure twitched, just slightly, but enough that every instinct in their bodies screamed to run. Then, all at once, the entire chamber came to life. The walls lit up with cascading light patterns, and the hum rose into a high-frequency vibration that made their ears ring. The column pulsed. Dr. Cross shouted over the noise, "Record everything. Do not shut it down." The figure's body convulsed. A burst of light erupted from its chest, spreading like liquid across the walls. Every symbol flared white, and in that moment the lights from their gear flickered out completely. They stood in total darkness. Then a sound filled the air. Not mechanical, not human, but something in between. A deep, resonant tone that seemed to form words inside their heads. "Who opens the gate?" Lena screamed, clutching her ears. Jake dropped his camera. Marcus fired a shot blindly into the dark, the echo swallowed instantly by the walls. The light returned dim, blue, trembling, and they saw that the figure was gone. The column was empty. Saraset's scanner emitted a long, continuous beep. "Something's moving," she whispered. "All around us." Footsteps echoed, soft, deliberate, not theirs. Marcus aimed his rifle into the tunnel they had entered from. "We need to leave now." But before they could move, the voice came again, this time closer, sharper. "You were not invited." The lights on the walls began to flicker rapidly, strobing between blue and red. The air vibrated so violently that the ground cracked beneath them. Cross grabbed his camera and yelled, "Everyone back to the shaft." They ran. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting, pulsing with every step. Behind them, something moved, shadows gliding across the walls, tall, thin, silent. Jake turned once to look and screamed, "It's Sips following us." They reached the shaft, ropes still hanging. Marcus shoved Jake upward first, then Sarah. As Lena climbed, the sound of metal twisting filled the air. The hatch above them was closing. Cross pushed Lena up and shouted, "Go! Don't fit, look back." He stayed behind for one last look. Through the flickering light, he saw the chamber collapsing inward, as if reality itself was folding. And then, something reached out of the dark. He caught only a glimpse, long skeletal fingers, black as obsidian, stretching toward him. He hit the emergency ascent button, and the rope yanked him upward just as the shaft filled with blinding light. When they emerged on the surface, the hatch slammed shut behind them, sealing the desert in silence once again. No one spoke. They simply stared at the ground, breathing hard, their faces pale under the moonlight. Finally, Jake whispered, "We have to destroy the footage." Dr. Cross stared at his camera, its red recording light still blinking. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "The world needs to see what sips down there." Far away, across the silent dunes, a faint blue glow flickered beneath the sand, proof that something below Area 55 had awakened. The morning after the encounter, the desert was quiet again. Nothing moved, except the slow wind brushing over the dunes. The team sat in their makeshift command tent, exhausted, their eyes hollow and faces drained of color. The events of the night still pulsed behind their eyelids every time they blinked. The blue light, the voice, the figure, it all felt like a fever dream, but the recording equipment told a different story. Dr. Cross sat in front of the console, scrubbing through the footage from Jake's camera. Static filled the screen, flashing bursts of white and blue. The sound warped like a broken radio signal. Every few seconds, a frame would flash, a distorted image of the underground chamber, the column, and the shadowy figure before it vanished into light. Lena paced behind him, muttering under her breath. "This doesn't make sense. The equipment should failed completely after that energy spike. It sets like something wanted us to record this." Sarah sat on a cot nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the floor. "I keep hearing it," she said softly. "That voice. Even now, it sets like it sits inside my head." Marcus, sharpening his knife just to keep his hands busy, looked up. "Voices don't sit follow you out of holes in the ground, Sarah." But his tone didn't sound convincing, even to himself. Jake, who had been silent since the incident, suddenly looked up, the transmission. Everyone turned to him. When the walls lit up, my receiver picked up a signal, short, looping, encrypted. I thought it was interference, but it sets not. I decoded part of it before I passed out. Dr. Cross leaned forward. "What did it say?" Jake pulled a small device from his pocket, set it on the table, and pressed play. At first, it was just static. Then, buried under the distortion, a series of tones formed a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Then came words, distorted, mechanical, and hollow. "Containment, breach, initiated. Gate, not secure." The team exchanged uneasy looks. Sarah Sip's voice trembled. "Containment breach? You think that thing we saw, it was being held there?" Cross exhaled slowly. "Or imprisoned." Lena turned toward him. "By who? The military? Or something else?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the flickering screen again. Frame by frame, he zoomed in on the last clear image of the figure inside the column. For a split second before the explosion of light, something else appeared in the corner of the frame. An outline, human-shaped, wearing what looked like a hazmat suit, standing just outside the visible range of the camera. Then it vanished. "Someone else was down there," Cross said quietly. Jake shook his head. "No way. We scanned for movement. There was no one." "Maybe not alive," Marcus muttered. The tent fell silent again, the hum of the generator filling the air. Outside, the wind picked up, slamming against the fabric walls. Zara suddenly stood up. "We shouldn't be here. We have to leave. Whatever that thing was, it set's not done with us. You all heard the message, it set's still active." Cross looked up at her. If something was contained there, and it sits no longer secure, leaving one sit stop what sits coming. We need to understand it. Sarah glared at him. eyes wide with fear. Understand it? Evan. It spoke to us. It knew we were there. It said we weren't invited. Exactly, Cross replied calmly. Which means it knew someone else was. Someone who opened that gate first. Lena rubbed her temples. So you think the site wasn't set abandoned, that it sets part of a larger system? Cross nodded. Area 55 isn't set listed anywhere. No records, no references in any classified file. That alone is impossible. Which means whatever was built down there predates all of it. Maybe it wasn't set even military in origin. The tent lights flickered. The generator sputtered, then went out. They were plunged into darkness. Jake cursed, fumbling for his flashlight. The beam cut through the black and landed on something outside. For a moment they all froze. Just beyond the thin tent fabric, a tall, still silhouette stood against the sand, motionless, humanoid, but somehow wrong. The head was too narrow, the limbs too long. Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved toward the flap, but Cross raised a hand. Wait. He stepped closer to the edge of the tent, voice steady. Who sets out there? No answer, just the soft hiss of wind. Sarah whispered, it followed us. Marcus didn't wait. He pushed through the flap and aimed into the dark. Nothing. The desert stretched empty in every direction. Only footprints in the sand where the figure had stood, long, sunken, inhuman footprints. When he came back inside, his face was pale. Whatever that was, it didn't walk away, it just stopped existing. The radio crackled suddenly. A burst of static, followed by a single distorted phrase, "Gate will reopen." Then silence. They all stared at the radio, frozen. Lenaset's voice broke the silence. "We search pulling out. Now." No one argued. They began packing their equipment. But as Jake tried to retrieve the hard drive from the recorder, the screen flashed again. Blue light. Then a new message appeared across the display, typed out by no one. Containment node. Active. Jake backed away. It's Sitsid's controlling the system. Sarah Sipta's voice was barely a whisper. It's Sipta's not gone. Outside, the air began to hum again, the same low frequency they had heard beneath the desert. The sand near the hill shifted, rising in small waves like something was moving beneath it. Cross ran out of the tent, camera still in hand. "It sits reacting to us," he shouted. "Get this on film." The others followed, though every instinct screamed to run. The hill where the hatch had sealed itself the night before was glowing faintly blue again, the sand above it trembling as if breathing. Then a sound, low, deep, almost like a mechanical heartbeat, echoed across the desert. The glow brightened, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. Lena stared in disbelief. "It sets, opening again." "No," Cross said. "It sets calling for something." Suddenly, a column of light burst from the ground, shooting straight into the sky. The air trembled, waves of heat rippling outward. The sound became unbearable, like every frequency at once. Sarah screamed, clutching her ears. Jake dropped his camera, the lens cracking as it hit the sand. Marcus fell to his knees, shouting over the noise. And then, as quickly as it started, everything went still. The light vanished, the sand settled, the hill returned to silence. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Cross said quietly, "That wasn't set a message, that was a signal." Lena turned to him, her face pale. A signal to what? He didn't answer, but deep down, he already knew. Something had heard them, something had seen them, and somewhere beyond the desert, far from Area 55, something else had begun to move. They drove through the night without speaking, the tires carving long trails across the endless desert. The air felt heavier now, almost electric, as if the atmosphere itself had changed. When dawn finally broke over the horizon, the light didn't bring relief. It brought more questions. The team stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of Groom Lake, dusty and silent, except for the buzzing neon sign that flickered above the entrance. Marcus filled the tank, while the others stayed in the SUV. Sarah stared out the window, her reflection pale in the glass. "You all saw it," she whispered. "It wasn't just light, it was communication. It reached for something. Dr. Cross rubbed his eyes, exhaustion deepening the lines in his face. And something answered. That wasn't natural energy. That was synchronization, like it was aligning frequencies with us. Lena leaned forward from the back seat. But aligning for what? We triggered something that had been asleep for decades, maybe centuries. That fee containment no-tit message on the recorder means this was part of a network. If one opened, others might too. Jake swallowed hard. So you sit to saying there could be more of those things, more gates? Cross nodded slowly. It's possible. Maybe Area 55 was just one node in a global system. Something humanity didn't set build but decided to hide. The conversation fell silent again. The radio scanner on the dashboard crackled, cutting through the tension. Static first, then a faint voice. It was distorted, distant, and broken up by bursts of interference, but they could make out fragments. Containment compromised, repeat, no 2-4 burr. Breach confirmed. Linafet's head snapped toward the radio. That SIP's not local traffic. That SIP's military encryption. Marcus Sitz's jaw tightened. They were already responding. Responding to what? Sarah asked, voice shaking. Cross stared out toward the desert, to whatever we just released. When they returned to their temporary research base near Rachel, Nevada, the situation had already spiraled beyond them. The camp was half dismantled, equipment missing, their computers wiped clean. The data servers that held their recordings had been disconnected, wires cut with precision. Jake ran to his backup drives, hidden under a tarp in one of the crates. Gone. Every single one. Someone four's been here, he said, his voice tight. They took everything. Marcus scanned the perimeter, his military instincts kicking in. Footprints, boot treads, standard issue, US military, at least 4 men. Lena opened her laptop to check the cloud backups, but the connection refused to stabilize. The network showed an error they'd never seen before. Access denied classified channel. How can our data be classified by the government when we never sent it anywhere? She muttered. Cross didn't answer. He just stared at the message on the screen. They knew what we were doing before we even uploaded it. Sarah sank to the ground, her hands over her face. Then it sips over, everything we saw, everything we found, it sips already buried again. Jake shook his head. No, I hid a copy. The others turned toward him. When the signal started repeating last night, I saved a fragment of the transmission to my personal drive. It sips not much, but it sips enough to prove something happened. Cross stepped closer. Where is it? Jake hesitated. Hidden. In the van. But if they sit tracking us? A low rumble cut him off. Outside, engines, multiple, dust clouds rose in the distance, 3 unmarked black SUVs speeding toward their base. Marcus grabbed his rifle. They are here. Move, Cross ordered. Now. They ran to the van, Jake fumbling with the keys, Sarah clutching the remaining gear. The engines behind them grew louder, closer, until the ground itself seemed to shake. Bullets struck the sand near the vehicles, sending dust into the air. Marcus fired back blindly as they jumped into the van. The tires screeched, spitting gravel as they sped down the dirt road toward the highway. In the side mirror, Cross saw the SUVs following, military-grade tinted windows, no plates. Lena clutched the recorder in her lap, staring at the faintly glowing screen. It sits still on, she said. The message, it sits, still broadcasting. Jake looked back in panic. Broadcasting to who? Sarah pointed out the window. Maybe to them. The radio blared again, this time clearer. A voice, deep and controlled, spoke through the static. This operation is classified. Cease transmission immediately. You are in violation of containment protocol. Cross leaned forward toward the mic. This isn't set to your containment anymore. You don't set even know what you set to your holding down there. The voice didn't respond. But something else came through. A second signal, overlapping the first. Not human. A sharp series of tones that rose and fell like digital breathing. Then through the distortion came a single phrase. We are awake. The van's electronics went haywire. The dashboard lights flickered, the engine stuttered, and Lena screamed as her laptop screen flashed blue symbols that burned across the display. Cross shouted, "Kill the power." Jake yanked the ignition key, and the van coasted to a stop on the empty road. Silence returned, thick, suffocating. The SUVs stopped about 100 meters behind them. None of the doors opened. They just sat there, engines idling. Marcus raised his rifle again. "Orders." "Stay still," Cross said quietly. "They still not here to kill us. They still here to contain us." A moment later, the nearest SUV door opened, and two men stepped out, dressed in black tactical uniforms with unmarked patches. One of them held a device that looked like a handheld scanner. The other carried a briefcase. The first man spoke, his voice amplified by a modulator. "Dr. Evan Cross. You and your team are now under Directive Echo 7. You have encountered restricted phenomena beyond your clearance level. Hand over all remaining data and equipment." Cross didn't set move. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head slightly. "The ones keeping the world from knowing what you just woke up." Lena whispered, "They know." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, opening it to reveal several vials of dark metallic fluid. "This is not a negotiation," he said calmly. "That signal you released? It's spreading. Every transmitter within 1,000 miles is replicating it. We're here to neutralize the source before it reaches critical propagation." Jake frowned. "Propagation? You mean like it sets alive?" The man didn't answer. He simply extended his hand. "The drive, now." Cross hesitated. "You can stop this. That signal isn't coming from below anymore. It sits everywhere." The agent tip's expression, didn't it change? "Then you doomed us all." Before anyone could respond, the air filled with the same low hum they'd heard before, deep pulsing coming from the horizon. The agents looked up sharply. The hum grew louder, the sky shifting from pale blue to a strange metallic grey. Sarah grabbed Cross's arm. "It's happening again." The agents exchanged glances. One of them spoke into his earpiece. "Command, this is Strike Team Theta. We have reactivation, level red event. I repeat, level red." The rest of his words vanished as the ground began to tremble. A flash of blue light exploded from the desert miles away, another containment node opening. The man turned back to Cross, eyes wide for the first time. "You didn't just find one. You triggered them all." The wind howled, carrying a faint, inhuman sound through the air. A whisper so low it almost sounded like breathing. The agents retreated to their vehicles. The black SUVs spun around and raced back toward the horizon, disappearing into the growing dust storm. The team stood in the middle of the road, the world trembling beneath their feet, the faint blue glow of the desert pulsing like a heartbeat. Cross looked down at the drive still in his hand. "We can destroy it now," he said softly. "It sits already in the system." Lena stared at him. "Then what do we do?" He turned toward the glowing horizon. "We find out what SIP's coming through." The desert around Area 55 was never truly silent, but that night the quiet carried weight, a suffocating stillness that seemed to listen. The team of 6 soldiers moved cautiously through the darkness, their boots pressing into sand that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. They were deep inside the restricted zone now, miles beyond where any official maps dared to show. Their mission was simple on paper: recover classified equipment from an abandoned military site. But each of them knew it wasn't that simple. No one sent a team this far out without reason, and whatever had been hidden here wasn't meant to be found. The deeper they went, the stranger the landscape became. The ground was scarred by old craters, like something had struck the earth with impossible force. Bits of twisted metal jutted from the ground. Not wreckage, not exactly. The fragments were smooth, seamless, and when the light hit them, they seemed to shift color like oil on water. The radiation meters ticked faintly, just enough to make everyone uneasy. Sergeant Lewis, the oldest among them, led the way, his expression hard but tense. "Keep your eyes open," he whispered into the comms. "Whatever's out here, it's not supposed to exist." They reached the first structure around midnight. A massive dome, half buried beneath the desert. Its outer shell looked like concrete, but up close, it felt warm to the touch. A faint vibration came through the gloves, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The access panel was covered in strange markings. Not military, not even English. Yet when one of the soldiers, Cooper, placed his hand on it, the panel flickered to life. The door opened on its own with a hiss, releasing a gust of cold, sterile air. Inside, the floor reflected their faces like glass. The temperature dropped instantly, breath turning into mist. The deeper they went inside, the more wrong it felt. Their flashlights revealed corridors that stretched endlessly in both directions, walls covered in strange organic patterns, veins or roots, pulsing faintly with light. It looked alive. The radio signals began to distort, picking up static, then whispers. Not words exactly, just a low rhythmic murmur, like voices underwater. Every few steps, one of them would swear they saw movement in their peripheral vision. Shadows slipping along the walls, gone before they could turn their heads. After an hour of navigating the maze-like halls, they reached a massive chamber, circular, with a glass observation window looking down into a pit. Below, the air shimmered as though heat rose from invisible flames. In the center of the pit floated a dark shape, smooth, metallic, hovering several feet above the ground. It wasn't attached to anything, but the floor beneath it glowed with shifting symbols, pulsing in sync with that same low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound vibrated through their bones, making their vision swim for a moment. Lewis ordered them to start recording. As they did, the lights flickered. For a brief moment, the cameras captured something else. A flash of figures surrounding the object, human-like but distorted, their forms glitching as though reality couldn't hold them. When the lights stabilized, the figures were gone. The object pulsed brighter, and the temperature dropped even further. Frost began to form on their gear. Then, without warning, one of the soldiers, Daniels, screamed. He dropped his rifle and clutched his head, blood trickling from his nose and ears. His camera feed showed static, then strange images. An endless void, a landscape of light, and thousands of eyes staring back. They tried to pull him back, but as they touched him, the lights dimmed to red. The floating object descended slowly toward the ground, its surface rippling like liquid metal. The whispers in the comms grew louder, clearer, fragments of phrases in a voice that wasn't human. "We never left. We are the foundation. You woke us." The ground began to tremble. The veins on the walls brightened, flowing upward, connecting to the object. The whole facility seemed to come alive, as if responding to their presence. Daniels suddenly stopped screaming and stood up straight. His eyes were pure black, reflecting the light like mirrors. When he spoke, it wasn't in his voice. It was deeper, layered, like multiple voices speaking in unison. "You were warned not to enter," he said. "This place isn't for you." The team stumbled backward, horrified. Lewis aimed his weapon, his hands shaking. "Who are you?" he demanded. The response came as a single chilling sentence. "We are what you made, and what you forgot." At that moment, the entire structure began to collapse. The glass observation window shattered, and waves of light and dust surged upward from the pit. The floating object split into fragments that darted through the air, like shards of shadow, phasing through solid walls. The team ran, barely keeping their balance as the corridors twisted. Each turn led them somewhere new, as if the base itself was rearranging to trap them. The radio crackled with a faint signal from command, but it was almost unintelligible. Only a few words broke through. "Abort, leave, do not bring it back." They found an access shaft and climbed, the metal ladder shaking beneath them. One of them looked down and froze. The floor below wasn't collapsing anymore. It was rising, a black mass pushing upward like liquid, consuming everything it touched. It moved too intelligently to be molten rock. It looked like it was reaching for them. They climbed faster, emerging at last into the night air. Behind them, the dome cracked open with a thunderous roar, and a column of red light shot into the sky. The sand rippled outward in waves, distorting the stars above. They didn't stop running until they reached their transport vehicles miles away, but when they looked back, the desert was calm again. No light, no structure, nothing but empty sand. The facility was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Command denied receiving any distress call. The footage they brought back was corrupted, most of it static. But in one surviving frame, the floating object could still be seen, and in its reflection, 6 shadowy figures staring back. The strange part? There had only been 5 men in the team. Over the following weeks, strange things began to happen. Electronic devices near the recovered footage malfunctioned. Some of the soldiers reported hearing faint whispers, even when no one was around. One night, Sergeant Lewis disappeared. His home was found undisturbed. Lights on, food half-eaten. Only his camera was missing. The only thing found in the desert where the facility had been was a single footprint. Not human, not animal, but something else. To this day, no one can explain what the team saw inside Area 55. The official report claimed structural failure, but those who've seen the classified recordings know better. Something down there was alive, and it's possible it still is, waiting beneath the desert, just beyond the reach of light. When the official investigation into the Area 55 incident began, everything that mattered was already gone. The site, the data, the evidence, and most importantly, the people who could tell the truth. What remained were fragments, corrupted files, blacked-out reports, and the haunted silence of those who survived. The government sealed every trace of Operation Silent Ice under layers of classification, but whispers leaked through anyway. Some called it a containment breach, others called it an encounter. The truth, however, was far stranger, and it began to surface weeks after the mission was declared a failure due to structural instability. The only known survivor, Private Mason Hart, was debriefed at an undisclosed facility. For days he refused to speak. When he finally did, his first words chilled the officers to their core. "It's still awake," he whispered, staring past them as if seeing something they couldn't. His pulse was irregular, his temperature abnormally low, and cameras recorded strange fluctuations in electromagnetic fields around him. Sometimes his voice would distort mid-sentence, picking up echoes that didn't belong. Within a week, Mason vanished from his room without a trace. Security footage showed him walking down a hallway, and then frame by frame, dissolving into static. After his disappearance, a team of analysts reviewed the corrupted footage recovered from the mission. The files had been deemed unreadable, but through specialized reconstruction, a few seconds of visual data were restored. In one frame, a massive structure appeared beneath the desert, not the dome they entered, but something far larger, a labyrinth of tunnels stretching miles beneath the surface. The walls pulsed faintly, as though alive, and embedded within them were what looked like pods, hundreds of them, filled with motionless shapes that resembled human silhouettes. The analysts stopped playback immediately. A few days later, the footage was destroyed under Security Directive Red Level. Still, the anomalies didn't stop. Reports began pouring in from nearby regions. Strange lights over the desert, dead animals found with no signs of struggle, and malfunctioning satellites whenever they passed over the restricted coordinates. One civilian pilot claimed to see something enormous moving beneath the sand during a night flight. "It wasn't a shadow," he said in an interview that was later scrubbed from the internet. "It was breathing." Inside the classified facility where Mason Hart had been held, other things started happening. Security alarms triggered for no reason, and equipment readings fluctuated wildly at night. One guard described hearing footsteps in the empty corridors and seeing flickering shapes in the corner of his vision. Surveillance footage showed faint silhouettes walking beside staff members, even though they were completely alone. The scientists believed it was a side effect of psychological contamination, but those who were there began to whisper that the soldiers had brought something back with them, something that wasn't bound to the facility anymore. Meanwhile, fragments of data continued to reappear on the servers. Files labeled "Do Not Open" appeared automatically without being uploaded. When opened, they displayed distorted audio, like whispers underwater, accompanied by flashes of strange symbols. Experts who analyzed the signals noticed they repeated every 12 seconds, forming a pattern similar to a human heartbeat. Some even believed it was a message, not from humans, but from the entity beneath Area 55. The last frame of one recovered video showed coordinates in the desert, followed by a single phrase appearing on the screen, we never left. By month's end, a recovery team was sent back into the desert under a new operation name, Echo Mirage. Their mission was simple: verify if the dome still existed. When they arrived at the coordinates, there was nothing, no dome, no ruins, just shifting sand. But their instruments began to malfunction. Compass needles spun endlessly, and thermal cameras picked up cold zones instead of heat. Beneath the surface, their scanners detected hollow spaces, long tunnels buried deep, stretching for miles. Against orders, 2 members went down using a ground-penetrating probe camera. What they saw sent one of them screaming, an eye, massive and unblinking, staring directly into the lens before the feed went dark. The team pulled back immediately. Days later, one of the researchers, a man named Dr. Kellis, went missing after insisting he heard something calling from beneath the desert. His last logged note read, "The heartbeat never stopped. It's waiting for us to return." When his colleagues accessed his workstation, all files related to the Area 55 incident were wiped clean, replaced by a single corrupted image, a black sphere floating above sand, surrounded by faint silhouettes. Months later, the government officially terminated all Area 55 operations. The site was reclassified as a non-existent facility, its coordinates erased from all known maps. But satellite data continued to show irregular heat spikes in the area, appearing at random intervals, as if something beneath the desert still pulsed. Locals living near the restricted border began reporting strange hums at night, deep vibrations that made windows shake and dogs howl uncontrollably. Some even swore they saw faint red light flickering on the horizon, like something trying to break through. Then, a video surfaced online, a shaky recording allegedly taken by a group of urban explorers who stumbled near the border. The footage showed them laughing, climbing over fences, until the camera began to distort. One of them pointed toward a faint light in the distance. The camera zoomed in, and for a moment, a massive silhouette appeared, humanoid in shape, but impossibly large, moving with slow, deliberate steps. The feed cut out after a sharp flash. The account that posted it vanished within hours, and every mirror copy was deleted by unknown users. The few who downloaded it early claimed that when they played the file back, they heard whispers in the background saying, "It remembers you." In the following weeks, radio operators picked up strange transmissions near the same frequencies used by the old Area 55 command network. The messages were faint, but one repeated phrase was clear: "Containment breach pending, subject awake." Every attempt to trace the origin ended abruptly, as if the signal was being transmitted from nowhere and everywhere at once. Those frequencies were later blocked by national defense protocols, though no public explanation was ever released. Years have passed since the mission, but the mystery hasn't faded. Whistleblowers continue to emerge, hinting that Area 55 wasn't a test site. It was a containment facility. What the soldiers found that night wasn't alien, nor man-made. It was ancient. Some theorists suggest it predates civilization, buried to keep it hidden from the world. Others believe it's not of this Earth at all, something that arrived long before humans learned to look up at the stars. Late at night, satellite images still show disturbances, patterns in the sand resembling enormous circular impressions, like something vast shifting beneath the surface. The strange electromagnetic pulse recorded during those events matches the same frequency detected in the soldiers' corrupted footage from years ago. That frequency is now permanently classified. And yet, every so often, people driving through the Nevada desert report something strange. Their radios glitch, static fills the speakers, and just before the noise cuts off, a voice whispers faintly, cold, distant, and unmistakably human. It says only one thing: we never left the restricted zone. Whatever was buried beneath Area 55, whatever woke that night, it's still there, watching, waiting, and listening for anyone who dares to cross the line again.